film in natural lighting, they said. It'll be a great idea. Don't know if I believe that. So, I want to say this is like the third time I've tried filming this. Literally today, my parents came home. They were loud. Couldn't film. So, I'm taking advantage of the fact they've just left to try to bang this out. Basically, I read The Girl Next Door by Ash Ketchum. Ash Ketchum? Jack Ketchum. Please not Ash from Pokemon, that would be very concerning. I read The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum and I have a lot of thoughts. So I decided to read The Girl Next Door based off of Paperback Dreams, aka Kat's, recommendation. Well, did she recommend? I don't really know if I could say she recommended it, but she talked about it in, I think, her May wrap-up of last year, or this year? It was a wrap-up that she did and she mentioned it. Basically what she had said in that video was, oh yeah, this book's kind of based off of a true story, it's really messed up, it's about torture and murder and children getting involved in that. And I was like, interesting, sounds like something I need to read. As it turns out, The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum is actually based off of the true life story of Sylvia Likens. Now, for those of you who don't know about the case of Sylvia Likens, I'm assuming that most people probably don't, because I can't imagine people spend most of their free time looking up murder stories from, you know, the 60s and... Actually, no, I take that back. A lot of people do that right now. But basically, Sylvia Likens was 16 when she was abused and later murdered by her caregiver, Gertrude. The story of Sylvia Likens is very different to that of Meg from The Girl Next Door. Essentially, our book is told from the perspective of our protagonist David, who is a 12-year-old boy. It's written in hindsight, which I find was an interesting choice on Ketchum's part, because as we go through the story with David as a 12-year-old, we have input from David in like present day. It doesn't say what age he is, but I'm assuming middle-aged because he's had 2 wives. And he's on the 3rd. So, I'm gonna make a safe assumption, say, you know, he's at least like 40, if not. Man's really out here getting all the women. It's very interesting that it's written with hindsight, because I feel like Ketchum did this to make us sympathise more with our narrator and make him more likeable. Because through like the introductions of elder David, we see that he regrets the things that have happened, how his life has changed and been damaged from what happened when he was a child. So I guess in a way it makes us like him more. I don't really know. I'm very conflicted about how I feel about the character of David. Also, if you didn't realise, this is not spoiler free. This is spoiler heavy, because you literally can't talk about this book without talking about literally everything that happens in it, because it's such a mindfuck. This book, not for the faint of heart. You don't like torture? Don't read it. You don't like abuse? Don't read it. You don't like children partaking in this? Don't read it. Not your thing. Not for someone who's just trying to, you know, dip their toes into like the thriller genre. No, this would possibly scar you for life. I feel like it's more like life scarring whenever you realise it's based off of a true story, because then it makes you really question, you know, humanity. That aside, basically I kind of want to talk about where the book follows the story of Sylvia and then where it kind of runs away on a creative path, so to say. Sylvia Likens was 16-year-old whenever she and her little sister Jenny came into the care of a woman called Gertrude. I can't pronounce her last name. I can't. Knowing Sylvia's name is more important than knowing the abuser. Fuck that bitch. Sylvia and her sister Jenny were born into a family of carnival folk. So her parents worked in a carnival, they travelled all the time, their older siblings travelled with them, they travelled with them as well whenever they were growing up. But when they got to the ages of 16 for Sylvia and 15 for Jenny, their parents kind of decided, hey, wait, no, we want you guys to live an actual life. We want you to go to school, be able to make friends, settle down somewhere, not have to move all the time. So they came into contact with this woman called Gertrude and were like, yo, take care of our daughters, we'll send you money to do it, and that'd be pretty sweet. That'd be pretty cheap. So she said, yeah. Gertrude had 7 kids. She had a lot of her older kids were girls, and they were around the same age of Sylvia and Jenny. So in theory, it should have worked. It didn't. The girl next door differs in this way, because when we meet Meg, who's the character based off of Sylvia, and her little sister Susan, we discover that they have moved in with David's next door neighbour, Ruth, and her 3 sons. Her 3 sons are Donnie and Willie, twins, who are also 12 years old. David is 12. It's very important that they're 12. And the little brother, Woofer. His name's Ralphie, but they call him Woofer. He's a booger. I don't like him. He's a questionable child. He's 10 and he likes to burn things, you know, because that's a really promising sign. In the novel, Meg and Susan are cousins of Donnie, Willie and Woofer, and their parents have just died in a car crash that the 2 girls were also in, resulting in Susan being only semi-able to walk and having her legs covered in braces, bearing in mind this book is set in the 60s, and Meg just having a few quite bad scars. I understand the creative choice that Ketchum made here, because basically he decided, yo, I'm not going to give these girls a way out. They are stuck with this woman, stuck with her kids, and there's no escaping it. Which, kind of grim. I mean, I see his point, but you know, grim. What I found interesting about The Girl Next Door is the fact it's very focused on the fact that they're children. Obviously, in the case of Sylvia Likens herself, she was subjected to abuse, torment, and later torture at the hands of her caregiver, Gertrude, but also at the hands of her eldest daughters. And then the kids of the neighbourhood that they lived in found out about what was going on, and rather than, you know, telling the police, they joined in. Which obviously is awful. It's terrifying. I know that I'm, you know, trying to be upbeat in this, but at the end of the day, the story of Sylvia Likens is horrendous. It's interesting in the novel how all the characters have been aged down. So bearing in mind that Sylvia was 16, her sister Jenny was 15, in the book we have 14-year-old Meg, and we have 11-year-old Susan. And then we have David and the twins who are 12, and then the other kids around their like neighbourhood are also of the same age. These kids are bound together, thick and thin. It's this whole thing of like growing up together. They live in the same like cornered off road, and they all play together, they all hang out. They're basically like born to be best friends. And then Meg and Susan enter, and they're different. So obviously it becomes one of those us versus them, or so you'd think. David gets along really well with Meg. Everyone loves Meg at first, until they find out that Ruth doesn't like Meg. And once Ruth changes her mind, they all follow suit. Essentially, this book has a very cult-like mentality when it comes to Ruth and the children. Ruth, as basically what you can imagine as the Charles Manson, is like loving and like she loves the kids, they all love her, she lets them drink in her house, they're 12. She lets them drink, she smokes around them, she curses around them, she tells them explicit things that, you know, you shouldn't really be telling 12-year-old kids, but it's cool, it's fine, because it's Ruth and everyone loves Ruth. And then Ruth decides that she doesn't like Meg. And she decides Meg's too loud, Meg's too bitchy, Meg is slutty. Even though Meg is a 14-year-old girl, and the sluttiest thing that she did was just paint a picture for David. Wow. Saucy. Once Ruth's opinion on Meg changed, the children followed suit. Almost without even batting an eye. Within David's narration, you see that he kind of comes to the realization that, oh, if Ruth doesn't like her, then there has to be a reason. Ruth likes everybody. Ruth's great. He essentially idolizes her, which all the other kids do as well, because they view Ruth as not a martyr, but as a cool adult, the cool adult that you can actually go to and talk to and hang around and not kind of feel weird about it. It seems that from David's perspective, he views Ruth as another mother, considering the fact that his parents are going through a pretty messy divorce and she's always been there for him, always had a door open, always wanting him to come over, hang out with the kids, just been open to him. So the children follow suit with Ruth's lead. Ruth decides, nope, we don't like Meg. The kids go, alright, we don't like Meg. Except for David. He always has a bit of a soft spot in the novel for Meg, and you can't really blame him. When you read it, Meg is a really, really likable character. She's strong, she's feisty, she's humorous, she's an interesting character, and she's very loving to her younger sister, who, because of the accident they were in, can barely walk, and she takes care of her, which is very important, because a lot of the abuse that she suffers at the hands of Ruth is so Susan doesn't go through the same thing. Very hero-like, I know. But talking about heroes, that's the thing that kind of bothered me about this book. So when I started reading it, we were met with an older David, being like, you think you know what pain is? It's the first line in the book. Talking about how his life was changed forever the summer that Meg came, and everything was different, everything was awful. You kind of think, oh, he definitely had some part in this. But he doesn't. Essentially, David plays the middleman. He's there for Meg, he loves hanging out with Meg, he thinks Meg's great, he has a big crush on Meg because he's a 12-year-old boy and she's 14 and ginger, and he's like, ooh, beautiful. But at the same time, he's extremely loyal to Ruth, the kids, and everyone else, because they're basically his family. So he can't pick an outsider over them. Which I understand, but at the same time I'm like, Jack Ketchum, I know you want to make your character really likable, and you want to make him troubled, and have that whole moral grey area duality thing, the duality of man that every English teacher talks about. Just me thinking about the fact that I have to go back to uni. Wanna die. I was kind of disappointed by the end of this book because David stops being a participant, so to say. He never actively hurts Meg in the way that the other kids in town do, but he's always there, he's always watching, he knows what's going on, and he lets it happen until the ending portion of the book, in which he's like, maybe I shouldn't do this anymore, should probably help her, because by that point, it stopped being, oh, he knows Meg's being hit, or he knows Meg is being verbally abused or mentally abused. It's gotten to the point that Ruth locks Meg up in the basement, hanging her from her arms, and he's like, you know what? I'm fine with that. And the reason why he's fine with it, it turns out, is because there is the game. The game is a big concept in this novel. It has no name, just the game, which is kind of If you imagine Percy Jackson capture the flag, but it's like 9v1, and the one person has to break in and kill all the other kids, and then they win. Except the whole point of the game is they never win. So when the other kids capture them, they tie this kid to the tree and then make them do whatever they want, which is a warning sign because that's weird. As the book progresses and the game is being mentioned, they never play it in the book that we can like read to know what happens, but we get snippets and we hear about this girl called Denise, and Denise is loud and bitchy, and no one really likes Denise because she's Eddie's sister, and Eddie is basically the Henry Byers of the kids. Everyone's like, we're your friend, you scare me though. I apologise in advance. It seems the birds that are roosting around my house are rather aggravated presently, squawking angrily. But anyways, so we discovered that the game started off as a game only the boys played. Like, it was the guys' thing. They would hang out, they'd do whatever, they'd fight, blah 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 blah. They'd tie all of them to a tree and get them to confess something. But when Denise started playing, things changed, because Denise was a girl. And as we go through the novel, we find out that the boys are sexually repressed, I guess. They're kids. Sexuality is a big thing in this novel. It's a heavy underlying tone, because we discover that whenever the abuse to Meg starts and Ruth starts saying that it's okay, these kids stop viewing Meg as a person and as their friend and start viewing Meg as body. So whenever Ruth ends up tying Meg up in the basement and David comes over and he's like, yo, what's happening here? Donnie and Willie, the twins, are like, neighbor. It's sweet, it's fine, it's just the game. And David's left there like, wait, what? They're like, yeah, we told Mom about the game and we're just playing the game, so it's fine. It's Meg's turn and we've caught her. It's this manipulation of like what should have been a light-hearted childish game, which makes it freaky, because in that moment you as like the reader realize, oh, so this is how we're gonna manipulate the kids. Ruth essentially at this point takes this game that they've always played and they've used normal and used it to her advantage. And they have Meg tied up. Like, the abuse that Meg goes through is dark. Like, it is not good. As they have her tied up there, David's like, oh, this is a bit problematic. Maybe we shouldn't be doing this. Until Ruth's like, no, it's the game. We're just playing the game. So what do you do next? He's like, oh, I mean, like, we caught her, so like technically we punish her. We make her confess. This was the scene out of all of them, and there's a lot of really questionable scenes that probably made me the most uncomfortable. They essentially strip Meg and are then just left staring at her. Like, these 4 boys and this woman are just staring at her as she's tied up and completely vulnerable. And in that moment in David's narration, we see the switch. He stops thinking of her as Meg and he thinks of her as a woman. This girl, this body. And the rest of the boys think the same because they've never seen a naked girl before in their life. So she stops being Meg. They literally dehumanize her. Messed with my head. So through the next few weeks, they keep Meg down there and they keep her in the basement and they look at her. And Ruth says they're not allowed to touch them because she's dirty. And she probably has crabs, which the kids are like, what's crabs? During the time that she's down there and she's going through the abuse of being hit, being starved, being tied up, David is conflicted because every time he's away from her, he seems to realise, like, oh no, that's Meg. But when he's there, he's like, girl. And that's all that he can focus on, and that becomes all that the others focus on as well. She stops being a person to them, and she just turns into this symbol. And there was a really strange moment in the book whenever she was first tied up, and it gives you the image of like Jesus, like on the cross, making it out to be a religious moment. That was one that started feeling real culty to me, but it got worse. So like I said, this story was based off of the true life story of Sylvia Likens. A lot of the abuse that takes place within this book actually happened to Sylvia. There are bits that like people don't really know because not everything was like laid out step by step, because the abuse that happened to Sylvia took place over 3 months. So like you can't catalogue every single day of what happened, but some moments in the book are clear replicas or twisted versions of what happened to Sylvia. For example, the Coke bottle. If you've read this book, you know what the Coke bottle means. Not a fan, not a fan, not a fan. The scene was grim, hard to read. It basically involved Eddie, neighborhood wacko, attempting to shove a Coke bottle where a Coke bottle should not go. And was not fun. Not a good moment. But Ruth stopped it in the book. She was like, get away. Because she focused like, you can't touch her, you can't touch her, you can't touch her. No one's allowed to touch her but her. So that doesn't happen. In reality with Sylvia, that did happen, and a lot more, but I don't touch on that because that's a lot. There are other things, like they burned her. Like they burned her body, they burned and scarred words into her stomach. Derogatory words and phrases and things like that that did actually happen to Sylvia herself. And we're told all of this in detail. So not fun. And like I said, this is not for the faint of heart. Like it's not. Within the narration, something happened which I didn't expect. What I kind of thought this book would be was, oh, David's gonna join in at some point, they're gonna murder her, and now 30 years later he's like, shit, probably shouldn't have done that. No. David ends up trying to help her. He ends up trying to help Meg, he ends up trying to set her free, but also doesn't directly help. It was very strange. Essentially, he tries to help her without it being known that he's the one helping her, which didn't end well, and ended up in Meg being caught before she could escape, before she could leave the house and tell the police, because the moment that she went to leave, she was like, nah, I'm gonna go back and get my sister. Now, throughout all of this, we are seeing so much abuse towards Meg. Susan, not so much. We see Susan get yelled at, and we see Susan being used as like a bartering device, essentially, or leverage towards Meg, because anytime Meg didn't do something Ruth wanted, Ruth went, well, if it don't hurt you, it can just hurt your sister. So she did. Throughout all of this, Susan is very much like the symbol of like innocence, this like young, sweet girl who needs to be protected. So Meg, as the protector, goes back for her, ends up getting caught, yeeted back into the basement, and then the next day David goes over to check that she's gone, and she's not, and they find out David had a part in it. And then they sodomize her, which was real fun. Which did happen to Sylvia. God bless that poor girl. That did actually happen to her. And it was interesting because in the novel, Ketchum essentially like narrates up until that point, and then David, elder David, cuts in and says, there are some things which should never be seen and never be said. But they were seen and they will not be said. Essentially, that's me paraphrasing. So he doesn't say exactly what happens, but bad. And we can assume what happens. So they then leave David down there in the basement with Meg, and now Susan is chilling down there too. So, you know, it's a great old time. And they're all like, well, we're gonna die. And they figure Meg's definitely gonna die because she's succumbing to her wounds. And they find out at this time that Susan has been abused as well. Susan has been assaulted by Ruth this whole time, which really turned me. The thing that I found most interesting about this book is it relies so heavily on sexual sadism. All of the abuse, rather than stemming just from hatred, as it seemed to, and like jealousy in the case of Sylvia Likens when Gertrude was hurting her. It seems within the book everything stems from essentially Ruth being crazy, because throughout it David's kind of saying, oh, she's losing the plot, clearly, and her sexual sadism, because there's horrific images within it of her, not doing family friendly things whilst harming these girls. Basically, by the end of the novel, they try to make their great escape. Great escape didn't happen. They actually got essentially cock-blocked from their great escape. Meg dies. David and Susan live. Police officer ends up coming by, checking on them. And, you know, they live happily ever after. The ending kind of really annoyed me. I'm in two minds. Did I enjoy this book? Yes. Though saying that, I'm in the same kind of boat as Kat with this, Paperback Dreams Kat. She said this isn't the kind of book that is enjoyed because of the subject matter at hand. Like, it's very difficult to sit here and be like, oh, I loved reading this book, this is such a good book, like, amazing. No. It deals with such horrific, awful images and a story essentially that's based off of like true horror and something truly awful that happened, that you can't just offhandedly say, oh, this is a book I like. No, it's a lot heavier than that. The thing that conflicts me the most about it is I'm not sure how I feel about the whole progression of the story. And what I mean by that is I'm not sure how I feel about the hero complex. David turns from this passive boy into the hero. Like, he goes to save Meg. He doesn't do it in time, but he goes to save her and she's so grateful and she kisses him. And that just left a bad taste in my mouth. Because throughout all of this, Meg isn't seen as a person. She's just seen as the girl to win, the body, the thing that they want. She's the emblem of their like desires, but she's not a person anymore. And that really bothers me, because it seems that the only reason David ends up trying to save her is because she's that, like, she's a girl. Like, it turns into this whole like, oh, I love her kind of thing, when in reality, just no, not a fan. I think it was meant to be kind of like a twist that David ends up actually helping her, because as we all know in the case of Sylvia Likens, nobody helped Sylvia. Nobody helped her, and she ended up succumbing to her wounds and dying. Whereas in this novel we have the heroic attempt to save Meg, the heroic attempt to get out, to give Ruth what she deserves. But it kind of leaves a foul taste in my mouth, because, I don't know, it feels like it's too Hollywood, if you get me. Like, Meg does die in the end, like, it's not a happy ending, but so does Ruth. Ruth dies, and then David and Susan are left to go free and live their lives and be happy. And I don't know. I don't know, I'm very conflicted about how I feel about the ending. This is a very unsatisfactory way to kind of round this up. But I don't know how I feel about it. In short, I have a lot of thoughts. And I thought saying them all would like be really helpful and help me like kind of decide how I feel. And in some ways it has, but for the most part, I'm still conflicted. I feel like this is going to be a book that I think about a lot. I feel like it'll always kind of be on my mind. But yeah, essentially would I recommend this book? Yes and no. Not to the faint of heart, not to anyone who wants a fun, interesting book to read, but if you want to question the morality of man, maybe have a nosy at it. If you are a big fan of true crime, horror, thriller, things like that, and you feel like you can stomach it, then I feel like it's a very interesting book to read. And I would definitely recommend looking into the story of Sylvia Likens, because she should be remembered for everything that happened to her. That is all I have to say. So, yeah. Tell me your thoughts. Have you read this book? Have you not? Does the idea of it absolutely turn your stomach and you're not sure why you clicked on this? Probably. But yeah, that's it from me. I will drop my Instagram down below, my bookstagram, which is where I post most frequently. I say most frequently, I post like every few days, you know, if I'm gonna get bored. Thank you for watching.